All right, we're rolling. We're going to get started on day 2 of XDC. This does feel a little loud, though. It's booming. Scaring myself. All right. Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Everybody's awake this morning? Not too many people were up all night or anything like that? No? All right, great. I'm Paul Lefebvre, and today I am here to talk to you about what is easily the longest title of any Xojo session this week: Avoiding Troubleshooting Troubles, Effective Debugging Techniques to Help You Get Unstuck. This is great. It turns out that I get a couple people in this session that I think are here by mistake because they told me earlier they never have bugs in their code. But I think most people do, and we'll see if we get some tips here to help you out. So, Kent Beck. Anyone heard of Kent Beck? A few people. Great, great. He has a quote he came up with a long time ago, like 25 years ago or more, maybe 30 years ago. Make it work, make it right, make it faster. This is kind of an overall development mantra that I've adhered to for a long time. So long that I found this when I was cleaning out my office in the last month or so. This is a note card that's been, you can see the holes in it. It's been posted to my pegboard since 1994. And it actually says, make it run, make it right, make it fast. But that's my mantra here. So, but we go with make it work. That's the first thing. And when you're coding, you got to get something to happen. Otherwise, what's the point? So, you want to prove that your idea, what it is you're working on, is actually viable. So, proof of concept. And this is the fun process for people developing, the make it work process, because you're in there, you're digging around, you're trying stuff, you're trying to get something working, and then all of a sudden it compiles, and you are absolutely thrilled. It's running, you're ecstatic. It's so exciting when you see that. And then not only does it run, but then it actually does what you expected. And that sometimes is a happy feeling. But maybe it only did it that one time. Oh well, that's good enough, let's ship it. And and that's it. Thank you for coming, and no. We'll probably scratch the ship it thing for now and think about what happens next. So first part of your development process is to make it work, but that is not the last part of your development process. This is just the beginning. So now you need to make it right. And that means improving the code in some manner. Now, some of you probably wrote it exactly the way you wanted right up front, but it depends what you're working on, and that may not be the case. So this may be now the time for you to add some sort of error handling of some kind. It may be the time for you to be checking for edge cases for things that can happen, but maybe not all that often, but you know your users are going to do the first time they use your app, and you would never do. And this is all kind of falls under the thing of testing that, generally speaking, most developers don't really enjoy, but it is super important to make your code right. Make it fast. I'm not talking about this today. This is tomorrow's talk. So tomorrow morning, I'll be talking about the make it fast part. So you can come to that session, Virtuous Code Optimization, the session with the second longest title, tomorrow at 9 a.m. I forget which room it's in, but it'll be tomorrow. So that's all great. That process is fabulous if everything goes as expected. But what happens when it doesn't? What happens when you get stuck? Well, the first thing that I like to tell people when they get stuck is to take a break, take a breath, take a walk, stop staring at the code you've been staring at for a really long time, because you're not going to get anywhere. I don't know about the rest of you, but I've found plenty of times where I find I'm working on something and just pounding away, trying to get something to work, been staring at it for days, and it's not working what I want, and I just drop it for a period of time, go back to it next day, look at it in the morning, and the solution is obvious. it is embarrassingly obvious. And then you fix it and you're happy, but you're also a little frustrated that you wasted so much time at the beginning. So as silly as this sounds, this is a key way to help yourself get unstuck. So step away, just you take a break, move on to something else. Sleep is actually a good thing. It turns out that programmers often have this habit of sitting in front of their computers for really long stretches of time. I heard a rumor. And you actually do need to sleep. You gotta make these connections. You need to be rested, so do that. So some little healthy tips there. But the other thing to keep in mind when you're coding is, what do you actually expect the code to do? I run into this a lot. Yes, Bob?
Related to the previous slide, I get unstuck. Try to explain it to somebody else.
We'll be talking about that, yes. Bob said try to explain it to somebody else, but we'll talk about that in a bit. So one thing I see a lot with people that maybe don't do a lot of programming, or it's not like their main job, so they come in and out a bit, is what do you actually expect the code you wrote to actually do? You can't program by guessing and just randomly typing commands in and then hoping you'll get a result out that's what you want. You should have some expectation of what the code is going to do. So to know if it works, you have to know what you want it to do. And the corollary is, if you want to fix something, you have to know what was wrong. So these are important things to understand about the code before you're just in there randomly changing things and trying to guess what's happening. So you have to know what you expect to happen. And a surprising thing that I don't see a lot of people actually do, but you know, I'm old school, I've been coding since the 80s, is you know, actually you can read your code yourself and imagine in your head what's going to happen as you're going through it. So you can say, all right, this. And a surprising number of people don't always think it through that way. They just are going to hit the run, or just say, well, I'm just going to run what I got here, and we'll see what happens, and maybe it'll work. And, well, maybe it will, but that doesn't mean much at that point. So you have to have an understanding of what's going on there. I do see this a lot, too, with a lot of people that like to do, you run into the cut and paste coding club. You know, you can get a monthly subscription to that, I think. The cut and paste coding club is, well, I know this snippet of code works, so I'm going to grab it from the docs. I saw this snippet of code, I'm going to grab it from the forum. I Googled this snippet of code, I'm going to put it here. And they've got a method with a bunch of code that maybe isn't really understood at that point. So then if it doesn't work, well, who knows? You just got a bunch of code. So you got to look through the stuff and understand what is happening. Which brings us to the first thing that Xojo can help you with all this, is its debugger. So the debugger. How many people know Xojo has a debugger? You better see all your hands. Surprisingly, that isn't really true. There's a lot of people that don't realize whatever tool they're using actually has a debugger. So don't ignore your debugger. Your debugger is your friend, even if it seems like it's not at times, because it's always getting in your face. But this is the first thing to look at. I had someone tell me this once. They were running into some troubles, and they were trying to figure out lots of things, and they were saving the debugger as the last step. And that seemed a little backwards to me. I mean, I wouldn't save the debugger as the last step. Maybe not the first step. The first step maybe is walk away and, you know, refresh your mind a bit. But certainly I wouldn't wait until you've exhausted every other option to then decide, you know what, I'm gonna tap this breakpoint button, because that's really hard. So yeah, set breakpoints. Everyone knows what a breakpoint is. We'll look at some code in a moment, but you set your breakpoint, and it'll allow you to stop your code, and then you can step through. The break command is something I don't see a lot of people use effectively. It's an actual keyword. You type break. When that bit of code is reached, when you're running in debugging mode, boom, you drop into the debugger. You can use this in combination with conditions, ifs, and whatnot to actually make your code stop at a certain point, which is super handy if you don't exactly know when you want to stop, or you don't want to just set a breakpoint and have to iterate through a loop 50 times to get to the point you want. So definitely make sure you take advantage of the break command. And another useful thing is using computed properties to allow the debugger to appear when you want. So if you want to know when a property value has been changed, modified or even read for that matter, you could convert a regular property to a computed property, which will then have code in it. It could just be one line that returns the actual property behind the scenes or sets it. But you can put a breakpoint on that line. And then from that point forward, anytime that property is accessed, you drop into the debugger. So it can be a great way if you're working on some code that maybe you didn't even write, that you need to get an understanding for how it works, to allow you to see when something's modified, and then you can drop into the debugger and start to figure things out. And then, of course, once you're in the debugger, you get to stop through the code and watch variable values change and all that good stuff, and that can be used to help verify your expectations. So again, if you're going in with an expectation of what you think the code should be doing, the debugger is there to help you verify that. And if the debugger is telling you something completely different is happening, that can mean one of two things. One, it could mean that up is down and the world is busted and nothing is going to work. That one's less likely than your code is wrong. Another cool feature of the debugger is the step over and the step into and the other things there that allow you to jump into or out of methods for quickly getting where you need to. And like I said, the debugger is there to verify the expectations of what you think your code is supposed to be doing. So for example, and I see this a lot on the forum, if you're getting a file error, this is very common. You're trying to write cross-platform code and you're referring to a file and maybe you didn't tweak your paths to be appropriate for the different operating systems. So it works great in debug mode on your Mac, for example, but then you go to run something on Windows and you get some sort of weird error or exception because the file can't be found. Well, verify your expectation that that folder item is where you think it is. Just because it was there on the Mac doesn't mean squat if you're running somewhere else and things could be in different places. All right, so rubber ducking. This is what Bob mentioned to some extent. When you do get stuck, one great technique to help get you unstuck, it might not necessarily help you solve the problem, but the idea is to help get you unstuck, is to explain the situation or the problem to someone else. And this comes from the fact that it can literally be a rubber duck sitting at your desk. I have one of these things that I keep in my desk, a little Darth Vader stress ball. He sits up there, he's always staring at me and telling me the force is with me or whatever. And I can squeeze them and throw them. It's very handy. But I see this all the time. And if you work with other people, it's very handy to check with them first before you just rudely interrupt them. But say, hey, I'm stuck on something. Can I try and run this past you? And just talk it through. And I mean, how many people have done something along this time, and then before you finish explaining it, you're like, never mind, I just figured it out.
Yes.
Yeah, Philip, you got a question, or are you just raising your hand? He's agreeing. Philip's agreeing. Yeah, it's a super common thing, and it's easy, again, much like the taking a break thing, it's easy to get so drilled down into what you're working on that you forget to do something like that. And so don't. Take a moment to do this. I've even had this happen to me where, when you explain to someone else, it forces you to just dig into another level of your understanding. I've had situations where I'm like, I'm totally stuck on this. I'm going to post a question to our forum or Stack Overflow or whatever. And it's the same sort of thing. Before you finish typing and go to hit send, you're like, damn, that's totally, all right, I got it. And you just delete the post and you move on. And it doesn't make sense, but it works. So in addition to the debugger, which is super handy, first line of defense, there are other lines of defense. So logging. The debugger is great, but it's not really for everything. And what sort of things is it not great for? Well, long-running tasks, for example, you're going to get carpal tunnel stepping through something in the debugger by hitting the little step button repeatedly. You can try and guess where you want to put a breakpoint and keep hitting resume, but that can get tedious pretty quickly, so you might want to consider logging for something like that. If the app is actually out in the wild and has already shipped and you get a customer that's having some issues and you want to get some feedback on it, logging is a great way to get that. If you're drawing to the UI or with graphics, you can't really step through the debugger because of the refreshes that are going to change when you're jumping between the debugger and the running app. And of course, graphics drawing can often have lots of repeated calls that are just totally messed up by the fact that you're switching windows and whatnot. So graphics drawing can often be a problem with the debugger. So instead, you can use a log, and a lot of people will write their own log thing, but using the debug log command that's built into Xojo is a quick, easy option. You can actually view that in the IDE messages panel if you haven't noticed that. You can write to the log, and then you can change that bottom tab to messages, and you can see some of the output that is happening from your log commands. And you can, of course, like I mentioned, write your own logging that logs to a file or a database or whatever is appropriate for your needs. So simplifying code. I see this a lot. People will have some code that is really, it's code, but it might be a little more complicated than it needs to be. But more importantly, if you're having trouble with it, well, simplify it. So remove one-liners. There's a blog post, I think Norman wrote a blog post on this, on why you should remove one-liners. They're much easier to debug. A one-liner is a line of code that does multiple things. So maybe you're assigning something to a variable, and there's like 3 function calls on the right-hand side to get, call function 1, pass in something there, and you've got 3 function calls. Well, if you got a problem in there, you don't have a good way to see what the results of each of those function calls are without stepping into each of them one after another. So break that out into multiple lines. Make it 3 lines. Call function 1, save the value. Call function 2, save the value. Maybe you'll be able to isolate which function's actually giving you the problem. So don't just keep staring at that line and saying, it should work. There's no way that could be nil. Is it nil? Then there is a way it could be nil. So yeah, they're much harder to debug. So use your interim variables to help. Interim variables are great because in the debugger you can view them, you can breakpoint on them, all that good stuff. So it's just more complex. I know some people will be like, but one-liners, that's why I used to use C back in the day because it stands for clever and you can write your entire app on a single line. And that is wonderful. And it's like, no, that's not wonderful. That's just technically impressive. Oh, sorry, yes. Is there a performance difference between a one-liner and breaking it all out? I'm sure there is a performance difference. And that might apply to more of my talk tomorrow but there's a balance with everything. And much like when Carol was talking yesterday about database normalization, there can be performance differences depending on how far you go in either direction, but sometimes it makes sense to lean one way or the other. Yes, Phil, go ahead. All right, sing it in unison. All right, great. So Kem has done the detective work and decompiled some stuff to see that there's no real performance difference between the separated or versus a one-liner. So that's great. So that means, other than the slightly longer typing, I don't consider that a problem. It's certainly worth doing. Yes, as Philip said, readability is really nice. There's a lot of people that just are really fond of their concise one-liners, but I think less bugs in working code is more important than clever-looking code. So splitting into multiple methods is also a good way to simplify your code. Well, I think I'm talking about that again, but if not, I'll bring that up. And again, this all comes back down to verifying your expectations. So you're simplifying your code, you're getting it down to the steps that you can verify so that you can pinpoint where the problem actually is. I mean, if you get a giant method, the problem isn't necessarily the method. There's something in the method that's the problem, and you need to narrow it down. So isolate code. This is a bit about longer methods. Long methods can be confusing. You got to do a lot of scrolling. I don't particularly like that. You can use the code folding to help with that, so you can hide off chunks of things so they're not visible, but my take is, well, if you're using that a lot, maybe you should consider splitting that out into another method. So you can split your things into smaller chunks of code and separate methods. And I find this really handy because each method is doing its own specific thing, and then you can isolate the problem down to one method. So no longer is it my calculate pricing method that has a problem in it. It is some tiny little section of that I've now isolated into its own method that I can focus on figuring out where the issue is. And the IDE can actually help you with this a little bit by, you can use the convert to method little helper here. So you can select a chunk of code in the code editor and right click on it, and you can see, well, maybe those of you in the back can't see, but you can see there's a convert to method option right down there, and that's going to pop up a dialog and prompt you to enter a method name, maybe some parameters, and then we'll move all that code into another method for you. So an easy way to get that code out of there and into its own method where you can work on it better. All right, the other thing I like to remind people is to consider alternatives, because there are always multiple ways to solve a problem, believe it or not. But I do see a lot of people that are so happy that they got the first step right, the make it work step, that they don't want to touch anything again because they feel like, well, this is the limits of my abilities. I got it to work, and I don't want to change anything else. I might not be able to figure it out. But I guarantee you'll find another way to do it. So try some other way to solve the problem. Don't just stick with the original idea because it's the first one you came up with. It doesn't mean it was the best. It's just the first one you thought of that happened to work. So consider other ways to do that. Of course, check for errors. See a lot of people that will blindly just gloss over the errors. API 2.0 will kind of make that a little more obvious for you with the exception handling. There won't just be error codes you can ignore until you get a runtime error much later in your app that you are then like, I got an error here, but the problem really was caused here, and it's really hard to work your way backwards. In particular, database access right now, you do want to make absolutely sure you're checking that error property after every database call to make sure you do not have some sort of database error. And catching exceptions, I do recommend people use a try catch over the general exception command that has a single exception handler at the end of a method. That, again, makes it a little harder to understand where the actual exception came from because you just dropped the end of the method, and if you're catching a bunch of exceptions and your method's a little long, you need to back up a step and go back to the simplified code step to break that up a little easier so you can better isolate where the error might be coming from. Yes, Chuck. So the question is, if you just use try catch E as just like runtime exception? It must be runtime exception, yeah, because exception is a command, not a class. Yeah, I don't know why that would just be blank. I would expect it would have the message in it, but just catching runtime exceptions is probably not the world's best practice, because you run the risk of catching something that you might end up just glossing over or ignoring because you were catching everything. So the next thing is unit testing. And this is unit testing are repeatable tests that are run to verify your code. And what does it do? It verifies things work as expected. So what is this all about? Make your code match what you expect. So unit testing is a code that runs, it runs repeatedly. I mean, not continuously while your app's doing, but it's something you can run easily and repeatedly so that you can verify that changes you made still work. There is a unit testing framework for use with Xojo called Xojo Unit. There's a little picture of it here with all its built-in tests to verify that it itself works. And this is free and open source. It's at github.com/Xojo/Xojo Unit. I created this many, many years ago, but since then, Chem has taken and added so many features to it, it's barely mine at this point. But Xojo uses this internally for many things. Lots of framework tests are used. This runs nightly, I think, on all our nightly builds. So a handy thing. We'll look at this a little bit in a moment. You can also roll your own unit testing if you want, but why would you do that when you've got this one? You can just drop into your project. And then the general process for testing and test development, as they call it, or test-driven development, is if you find some sort of bug, you then write a test that you insert in your unit testing package so that that bug is then verified going forward. Yeah. It varies on how people adhere to this sort of thing, but it can be handy for certain things that are known to cause problems or are fragile. And test-driven development is a whole mantra. I bet you could find conferences that last longer than this one that just only talk about test-driven development. But yes, Kemp. All right, so Kem is reminding me the videos for a previous conference. You think it was last year, maybe? So that would have been 2016. So the 2016 videos, if you were here, something you might want to check those. There was a session on test-driven development that might be of interest. And of course, a separate project. If you're really stuck on something and it's part of a bigger project that maybe has so many other variables that it's hard to just figure anything out, you might want to see if you can extract out something to be able to test it more effectively. And this can allow you to isolate the problem, and it allows you to focus on that because this separate project will obviously be a lot smaller. Your test run cycle is going to be a lot faster. An example of something I just recently did for this was getting the Android app to run directly on the device. That obviously is an IDE feature. Well, not obviously, but Travis mentioned it yesterday, so maybe it will be. I'm not promising anything. But trying to hook that up through the entire IDE has a lot of components and stuff. So I started with a separate project first, so I could narrow down all the specifics to get these steps working. And then once I had an overall thing that was working, I was able to split that into its own class, get it a little bit more isolated, and then I could just take that separate project thing that I was pretty comfortable with was working the way I wanted, grab it, drop it into the IDE project, and test it there. And I still found a few other things with that integration part, but it was a much faster process than just attempting to do it right from scratch within the much bigger project. And this also, having a separate project, if you do run into a problem, it makes it easier to have something to share when you're doing your explanation with someone else. Or, maybe you actually, it happens from time to time, found a bug in Xojo. You can attach this sample project to a feedback case, and then we have something we can look at that we can actually figure out and work with. Version control, I like to remind people, who here is using version control? That is not enough hands. Yes, exactly. No one would do that. That's just mean. But I like to say, free yourself with version control, or source control as it is sometimes called. Git or Subversion these days are kind of the de facto standards. There's plenty of other ones. It doesn't really matter which one you decide to choose or use, but you really should use one of one kind. Time Machine is not a version control system, and neither is Dropbox. And do you have version control? You want to use that with Xojo's text project format. That's the Xojo project format. That saves your project as a bunch of separate text files for each project item, and that is super handy for the version control systems. And with a version control system, essentially, each time you save stuff, it is able to track the changes between the last time you so-called committed your changes up into the repository. So it always gives you a baseline. So you know, you have your code is in a certain state and you know you need to make a bunch of changes to it, you can go hog wild making these changes without the fear that you're totally going to completely break things and nothing's going to work again. Because if you do that, which you might, you just go back to the source control system and you just say to it, please give me back the version that worked. I'm going to throw away this other stuff and I'm going to try again. Or you can just compare it to other versions. You can also use it to compare other changes that other people have made. It's just a great way to keep the history of what's being worked on so you're not afraid to try new things. And it also helps to, you don't want to be afraid to just completely try something totally new, because it's always a little risky when you're going into some code and I'm just going to change as little as possible. But with a version control system and good tests to help you verify your expectations, you can actually maybe get a little bit more creative and maybe come up with something better. Because you can always get back to the original version. That's the magic. And quote from my grandfather, you can't break it twice. But I used to like to fiddle with gadgets and stuff, and he said, well, this one's already broken, so go crazy. Learn something from it. So let's switch here to Xojo real quick and take a look at a couple things. So here I have the Eddie's Electronics project with a very large font in the code editor. For anyone that's presenting, this is 32 points. If you have code, you might want to try that size. My little MacBook Air is struggling mightily to show this giant projector's display on it, so things are even tiny for me. All right, so this is Eddie's Electronics here, and it's got a couple bugs in it. I think one I added and one I found. So here, for example, I'm testing this out if I added some features, and this search feature is supposed to show names that start with whatever you type in. So if I type in A here, and I hit search, I should have gotten all the people whose names started with A. I didn't. I think Xojo's broken. I should probably post it in the forum. So what's going on here? Well, I got a bug. What on earth could the bug be? Eddie's Electronics has a fair amount of code, certainly not nearly as much as any of your projects, I'm sure. So the first thing here is to see, well, what's going on? How did I fire that code up? Well, I clicked the toolbar button in this case, so I can go to the controls and I can find my window toolbar and I can go to the action event handler and see what's going on there. And I can see, all right, well, that's calling the load customers method. So, well, I guess I'm already here in the code editor. I can just right-click on that and pick Go to Load Customers and see what's going on there. And, all right, I got some code here. And this code here is just going to show the customers, it looks like. But I got another method call up here that's finding the customers by name. And that looks problematic, but you know what? I want to just set a debugger breakpoint and try again, see if I can make sure this is following the flow I expect. And we haven't done anything yet, so we'll just continue there. And I'm going to try this again. So here I've dropped into the debugger. I'm at this particular line of code. I'm like, all right, I want to step into this, so I can use the step in button here. And I can now jump into this code. So here we got a method that looks promising. It has a select statement or two, and it is querying the database. And it looks like, looking down here in the debugger, I can see, some of you might not be able to see, search name says it has the A, that's what I typed, so that's matching my expectations. Looking at the code here, that means it should probably call this else statement here and do the select with this old school binding that API 2.0 is changing. And then binding in the search name to either the last name or the first name. So what could be the problem here? Well, I mentioned how I wanted this to work. I wanted to find things that start with what's typed in there, but I forgot to include the wildcard. Search name is A, and I really want search name to have that wildcard at the end, which in the case of SQL for like is a %. So, like, all right, I think I got the problem, but let me, I can just step through this if I wanted. But that's not really telling me any new information. I really kind of know that search name is just A, and it's really not what I want. So at this point, I'm just going to hit the stop button, say, getting out of Dodge, this isn't doing what I want. So I want to come to this bit of code. So again, I'm going to right-click on that and jump to it. So here I am here. So, well, I want the search name to have a wildcard. I think the best way to do that is to add the wildcard. So we'll add the wildcard. So we'll rerun it. I left the breakpoints in at this point, so I can just hit continue or resume to jump through them. All super easy. I can come back in here, see that that's still being called, so I'm just going to continue and see. And look, I now have a list of things where every one of these names has an A, starts with an A, either as the first name or the last name. So that is more of what I expect. So that's good news. Now, another bug I noticed actually when I was testing that very simple thing was if I click outside the list, this is all still editable and stuff. Doesn't seem to make much sense because I no longer have a current customer selected. And I don't really think that's behavior I want. I bet if I change someone's name and try to save it, and who do I have here? I switch back. Yeah, see, it didn't save the name or anything, so something's not quite right here. And I really wouldn't expect, if I clicked outside here, to still be able to see all this stuff and edit it. So, goodness gracious, what's going on here? This is horrible. It's a bug. This is the shipping version that's included with Xojo. So it's horrible. I'm going to pull the cord, stop the build. So we got a problem. So what's going on there? Goodness gracious, where do we even start? Well, as so it happens, I happen to actually wrote this, so I do have some idea where to start. But we may have noticed when we were going through the debugging the first time that there was a method that kept popping up here, and it was the load customers method. That's where our find customers by name method was being called. But this one is what was populating the list box. So I started here looking around. Like, yeah, this is just loading values. It doesn't seem too directly related. So you know what? I'm a little stumped. So I'm going to switch over to the list box, which is what's here. I'm going to go to the change event. So I kind of think, well, this is what's called when you click on the list box. So I'm just going to set a breakpoint in here and see what's happening, or what's not happening in this case. All right, so now let's scroll to the bottom, click on this tiny area here. All right, so I didn't click on anything, so I'm now in the change event like I expect, and I can step through the code, see what's going on. All right, well, list index is less than 0 because I didn't select on a valid customer, so that kind of went to the right part. So I want to clear the customer ID. Oh, that looks great. And if I'm not in this, whatever this lock changes thing is, I want to, I did not expect that. Well, I do now, but I didn't before. I expected those fields to get cleared and to be all disabled. So that means something here with lock changes isn't quite right. So now what can I do now? Well, I can search, see what lock changes is all about. And it's only got 4 hits. And oh, look, one of them is load customers, which I happened to be looking at before. And we got a little note here. Hey, a comment. Well, that is a miracle. This comment was actually here. I didn't just add it for these purposes. This comment was here. But it's saying something about why lock changes is there to reduce some flicker on Windows. And then as I read that, I was like, I might not even need this anymore. But anyway, I'm leaving it here for now. One change at a time. And I see I set it to true when I'm loading. And that would probably imply that when I'm done loading, I should set it back to false. But, well, lo and behold, that never happens. So we're locking the changes, and then we never unlock the changes. So it looks to me like Clearing it after the data has been loaded is the solution here. So I can give that a try. So we'll continue, and I want to go to the bottom. And then I can step back through the code here. Oh, and there we go. We're now where we want. So let me just resume this, see what happens. So now I got more behavior I expect where that whole thing is cleared out when I click outside the thing, outside of a customer thing. So that's good. Bug solved, at least for these purposes. And maybe I'll remember to put that in R2. All right. So that was a quick demo. Hopefully some tips here that maybe help you or refresh your thing. So any question, comments, other suggestions people have on things that can help? Yes? So the question is, in the debugger, is there a way to put in favorites so you don't have to look through the entire list of essentially local variables that are available? No, there is not. I bet there's a feature request for that. Chuck, yes.
Is there a preference or something to set it so that if you get one, the messages being automatically switch to?
No, is there a preference? Right. Is there a preference that would automatically switch to the messages pane? We have a preference that actually would close the messages pane, but that's the opposite of what you want. I don't know, but that's a good idea, because if we do want people to take advantage of logging, not immediately hiding that pane would be good. But I don't know of one. Yes, here, way in the back. Right. So this is a great question / suggestion, which is there, sometimes you do take a lot of time setting up all your breakpoints in a carefully managed way, but there might be a time where you actually just want to run because you think you fixed it and you don't want to stop at every breakpoint and hit continue 15 times. Kind of like what I just had to do here in this little demo. And is there a way to pause the breaking, so to speak? No, there isn't, but I love that idea. All right, yes. Is there a way to move the comments? Okay, is there a way to move the messages panel to another screen? Yeah, you should be able to open another workspace window that has, essentially it's a duplicate of the current one, and then you should be able to drag that to another display. I don't generally work with two displays, but I would expect that to work. My expectation is that does work. Yes, right there. So the question is, splitting methods does have the risk of losing the context, because maybe you've got a ton of local variables in there that have some state that is necessary for the code that's running. And the solution is that you have to capture that and pass it in to the method as parameters in some way, or have some other tracking. I mean, maybe if they're shared more broadly, maybe a property is more appropriate, but passing parameters is often a safer, less fragile method to do that with. But that would be my preferred way, is to package up the stuff that you need and send it on in so that you have it. And then, that keeps everything nice and clean. And then sometimes when you're doing that, you find out that you have stuff in there that isn't even needed anymore and can only be in this new method you created. So you've simplified your original method even further. Right, yeah. So what Gary's saying, if you do have to pass stuff in and they need to be modified and then sent back to the method, which starts to get more complicated, you could pass things as in by ref so that the new method can modify them and the calling method will get access to the changes. That wouldn't be my preferred first choice, but that is an option. It's a little harder to track, a little more fragile again, because you get something that's changing in two different places. But you know, if you've got a ton of stuff you're packaging up, you might want to take a step back and consider, you know, should a bunch of this stuff maybe be its own class that I can just pass in and manage that way? Some of that comes back to design, but there are always lots of options in different ways. Yes, in the back. Okay. I'm not sure I understand the question. So if your app's locking up, you want to be able to see the last command that ran? Yeah, so, the only thing I can think of. Right. Well, sometimes you can get lucky in that case. If you just manually switch back to Xojo and go to the Debugger tab, it won't be stopped in there, but you can sometimes hit the pause button. And if you're stuck in an infinite loop or sometime, in that case, it should drop you into the method that's in the infinite loop, and that is helpful. But if it's stuck in like a main event loop or something like that, you might be out of luck, because then it might not drop you anyplace too helpful. Logging might be your best solution in that case to help you isolate it. And related to logging, there is a method called current method name that you can put in your log commands so that you can at least easily get the name of the method that the log command ran from to help you find back where something was. Michael, you had something? Yes, so Michael's question was the log also go to the Windows operating system so you can view them using their tools. And Dirk has confirmed it for him live. Showed him a screenshot, but yes, it does. Yeah. In the back, Jim. Well, the question is, we've been told over the years the new compiler would allow us to implement newer debugger type features. That is not an untrue statement. I would just say at this point, we haven't really added any new debugger features. I think the new compiler has probably enabled some. Travis has a comment on that. Right, that is a common request that Jim mentioned, is having a watch point of some kind where you can say, notify me or drop into the debugger when something happens to this variable. Right now you can somewhat simulate that with the breakpoint in a computer property that I mentioned, but it doesn't help with local variables and other things. And you don't want to convert all those things to properties just to be able to do that. That makes a mess of your code and kind of defeats some other purposes. So. Right, it could be part of favorite variables, and then but then certainly you just right-click on them and say, watch these two of my favorites. I totally agree, that would be super useful. I'm sure Travis is working on it now. I see him typing. Yes. All right, so Steve is pointing out that when you're running a web app in the debugger, the session, there's a command called session that gives you access to the current user session that popped up in the debugger. But you often can't just jump into the debugger to see session. So the trick is to just assign that to a local variable, and then you refer to the local variable. That trick, though, is useful for a lot of things besides this, just in general, particularly things that are global or hard to find, because you maybe got to go into the debugger and go to the drop-down and pick globals and search for stuff. You can just quickly assign something to a local variable. It kind of falls under the simplify your code and break out one-liners aspect. And then once it's in the local variable, you know, you can treat it as a favorite because all your local variables are your favorites. Mark, yeah. Okay, that's a great question. Yeah. Right, so Mark's asking if you specifically are checking for something to be nil, like an if statement, do you also need to worry about catching the exception? And no, you're going to want to catch the exception for things you can't easily check. Exception handling is a bit more expensive than just doing a simple if statement on a value. So if you can check that something is nil, absolutely check if it's nil, and then you're not going to get the exception because you'll know it's nil and you hopefully won't try to use it. You will certainly get an exception later if you try to use it and ignore the fact that it was nil, even after you checked. But yeah, you wouldn't have to worry about that. Yes? No, let me clarify that. He's worried when I said exception handling is expensive. The exceptions that are called repeatedly are more expensive than not having that. So if you're able to check for something that's nil with just an if statement, that is more efficient than just letting the nil object exception be raised each time and then catching that. So, I mean, you don't really are going to want code where exceptions are happening repeatedly. If you expect it to be there, try and look for it. Yeah, that's better. Travis has a comment on that. Right, as Travis is saying, some of these things, when you say expensive, that's in the context of something that's happening repeatedly. I'll talk about this more Friday on my optimization thing, but loops are the end of the world when it comes to performance improvement. And if you got a big loop and you got exceptions being raised in it, that is less efficient than just checking for them and not letting that happen. Yes? Right. Well, as Gary said, there's the alternative to try catch within the loop is to have the exception handler at the end of the method. And what is expensive isn't the command itself, it is the raising repeatedly in a loop. So it all depends how it's happening. But don't get too focused on that, as Travis said. It's just something to keep in mind. And I have to follow my own rules, and I'm 1 minute over, so I guess we're done. Thank you, everyone. All right, easy peasy. Turn this off.